Ancient prophecies have a chilling way of coming true. We are about to explore 25 predictions from forgotten times that history itself confirms actually happened. By the end, you will possess a collection of the most eerily accurate forecasts ever made. How could a Greek oracle know an empire would fall before its king even went to war? Why did an Aztec god's promised return bring about destruction instead of salvation? What does it feel like to question whether the future is truly unwritten? A king once asked a question that would seal his fate. Croesus, the immensely wealthy ruler of Lydia, stood at the peak of his power. Troubled by the rising Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, he sought the most famous council in the ancient world. He sent messengers to the Oracle at Delphi, a sacred site where a priestess, breathing mysterious vapors from a crack in the earth, would deliver the words of the god Apollo. His question was simple and direct. Should he wage war against the Persians? The oracle's reply was anything but. It declared that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. The message seemed clear, a divine endorsement of victory. Emboldened, Croesus mobilized his armies and marched, confident that the empire about to fall was that of his enemy. The resulting war, however, was a disaster. Croesus was decisively defeated. His capital, Sardis, was captured, and his own Lydian empire was utterly consumed by Persia. The great empire that fell was his own. The prophecy was perfectly accurate, yet fatally misunderstood. This is the power and peril of ambiguous language. The oracle never lied. It simply allowed the listener to hear what they wanted to hear, to see their own ambitions reflected in the divine mist. Croesus' story is a timeless lesson in the dangers of selective hearing, a warning that echoes across millennia. How many since have marched toward their doom, equally convinced they were fulfilling a destined victory? The same shadow of misinterpretation fell across ancient Rome, where a different kind of prophecy was guarded with the utmost secrecy. These were the Sibylline-books, a collection of cryptic verses purchased by a legendary king from a mysterious prophetess. They were not for public eyes. Instead, they were kept secure in the temple of Jupiter, consulted only by a special board of priests in times of extreme crisis. The state would turn to these scrolls when plague struck, when famine loomed, or when the gods seemed angry, seeking a divine prescription for survival. One such warning, pulled from the aged pages, spoke of a grave threat from a Gallic invasion. For years, the Romans lived with this unsettling prediction, a storm cloud always on the horizon. Then, in the year 390 before the Common Era, the cloud burst. A vast Gallic army, led by the chieftain Brennus, descended upon Italy. They crushed the Roman army at the Battle of the Allier River and marched, unopposed, on the city itself. Rome was sacked. Its buildings were burned, and its citizens were either slain or fled for their lives. Only the fortified Capitoline Hill held out, a last bastion in a sea of destruction. The prophecy from the Sibylline-books had come to pass with terrifying precision. The warning was real, but the Romans had failed to act upon it in time to prevent the disaster. This event seared itself into the Roman consciousness, a brutal lesson that a prophecy is only as powerful as the action it inspires. What good is a warning if you do not truly listen? Centuries later, in the candlelit study of a French apothecary, another kind of prophecy was being penned. Michel de Nostradamus composed his verses in a cryptic fog, a deliberate blend of Old French, Latin, and Greek that seemed designed to obscure as much as to reveal. His book, The Prophecies, contained nearly 1,000 four-line poems called quatrains, each one a riddle wrapped in an enigma. One of the most chillingly precise of these riddles is quatrain 51 from the 2nd century. It speaks of the blood of the just being demanded of London, burned by fire in 3 times 20 plus 6. The city, the verse warns, will be made desolate. For over a century after its publication, this verse was just another piece of his puzzling poetry. Then, in the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a small fire started in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Fanned by a strong wind and fed by the city's tightly packed wooden buildings, the spark became an inferno. For 4 days, the Great Fire of London raged, consuming over 13,000 houses and nearly 90 churches, leaving much of the medieval city in smoldering ruins. The number of direct fatalities was surprisingly low, but the destruction was absolute. When scholars later looked back at the quatrain, the numbers leaped from the page. 3 times 20 plus 6, that is 66. The year was 1666. The prophecy of a city burned by fire and made desolate had come to pass with an almost mathematical certainty. Yet, the enduring power of this prediction lies in its very ambiguity. Nostradamus never explicitly names London in that quatrain, and his phrasing is as murky as the Thames. He created a template so vague it could be applied to countless disasters, yet so specific in its numbers that it feels personally addressed to that one catastrophic event. This is the genius and the frustration of Nostradamus. He gives us just enough detail to seem astonishingly correct, while leaving sufficient room for our own minds to connect the dots, to see the reflection of history in his cloudy words. Far across the ocean, an entire civilization was waiting for its own destruction. The Maya, masters of astronomy and time, had long woven prophecies into the very fabric of their cosmology. Their sacred texts, like the books of Chilam Balam, spoke of a cycle of creation and dissolution, and within this grand cycle came a specific, chilling forecast. It was said that bearded men from the east would one day arrive, bringing with them a new religion and unimaginable upheaval. This was not a vague possibility, but a deeply held expectation rooted in their understanding of the world's rhythms. For generations, priests and seers had passed down this warning, a shadow on the horizon of their collective consciousness. Then, in the year 1519, the prophecy stepped out of legend and onto the beach. Spanish galleons, vessels unlike anything ever seen, appeared off the coast of the Yucatan. From them, disembarked men with pale skin and thick beards, clad in metal armor, led by the ambitious Hernán Cortés. To the Maya, observing from the shore, this was not a chance encounter. It was the fulfillment of a destiny foretold. Their own predictions had told them this day would come, which profoundly shaped their response. Some groups, believing resistance to be futile against a divinely ordained event, initially submitted or attempted alliance. Others fought fiercely, seeing the Spaniards not merely as invaders, but as the literal agents of a cosmic collapse they had long feared. The prophecy became a self-fulfilling narrative, a psychological weapon that preceded the Spanish swords and guns. The arrival of Cortés did not just bring military defeat, it shattered a worldview. How do you fight a future you were taught was inevitable? The accuracy of the Mayan prediction is haunting, yet it also reveals a tragic irony. They foresaw the event, but could not foresee the totality of the devastation that would follow. The diseases, the enslavement, the cultural erasure. Their prophecy was correct in its outline, but history delivered a horror far beyond any verse. Centuries before a Persian king would carve his name into history, a Hebrew prophet etched it into scripture. The book of Isaiah contains a passage that has stunned historians and theologians for millennia. It names Cyrus the Great directly and unequivocally as the chosen one who would free the Jewish people from their Babylonian captivity. There is just one impossible detail. Isaiah is believed to have lived and prophesied in the 8th century before the Common Era. Cyrus the Great did not rise to power and conquer Babylon until the 6th century. This means the prophecy potentially names a specific world leader roughly 150 years before he was born. The prediction is startlingly precise. It states that this future king, named Cyrus, would be anointed by God himself, that he would subdue nations and strip kings of their armor. Most importantly, it declares that he would issue a decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. For decades, the Jewish people lived in exile in Babylon, their homeland a distant memory, their sacred city in ruins. Then, history unfolded exactly as foretold. Cyrus the Great, founder of the vast Persian Empire, marched his armies into Babylon in the year 539 before the Common Era. True to the ancient words, he issued a famous proclamation recorded in the Book of Ezra. He not only permitted the Jews to return to their land, but he also funded the reconstruction of their temple, returning the sacred vessels that had been plundered decades earlier. He became the only non-Jew in the Bible to be given the title Messiah, or Anointed One, for this very act of liberation. The historical record from Cyrus' own Cyrus Cylinder confirms this policy of restoring displaced peoples and their sanctuaries, a radical act of tolerance for its time. The accuracy is breathtaking, but it raises a profound question. How could such a specific prediction exist? Some scholars propose that a later author, writing after the events had already occurred, added these passages to Isaiah's original work. Yet for those who take the text at face value, it stands as one of the most powerful and direct examples of a prophecy fulfilled, a message across time that suggests a hand guiding the currents of history itself. It transforms Cyrus from a mere historical figure into a central character in a divine drama written centuries before his birth. High in the Himalayan peaks, where the air is thin and ancient wisdom is carved into the landscape itself, a different kind of foresight was being recorded. Tibetan Buddhist texts and the utterances of revered lamas contain prophecies that seem to leap across centuries, describing a world that would have been utterly incomprehensible to their original audience. They spoke of an age when iron birds would fly through the sky, when horses would run on iron roads, and when people would communicate across vast distances as if they were in the same room. For monks living in secluded monasteries, these were not fantasies, but concrete predictions about a future era of profound change. The descriptions are startlingly literal. The iron bird is a clear parallel to the airplane, a metal vessel soaring through the air. The horse on an iron road evokes the powerful image of a locomotive pulling carriages along steel rails. The ability to see and hear events happening far away perfectly captures the essence of television and telecommunications. These prophecies were not vague omens. They were specific technological forecasts embedded within a spiritual framework. Their primary source is often traced to the Kalachakra Tantra, a profound and complex system of teachings, and to the visions of figures like the 8th century Master Padmasambhava, who hid spiritual treasures, or terma, to be discovered in later times. The cultural significance of these predictions in Tibetan Buddhism is profound. They are not celebrated as mere proof of clairvoyance, but are woven into a larger cosmological warning. This future age of technological marvel, they teach, would also be an age of great spiritual distraction and moral confusion. The very tools that connect us globally could also isolate us from our inner selves. The prophecy serves as a reminder that material progress must be balanced with wisdom and compassion, lest our inventions ultimately enslave rather than liberate us. It is a foresight that came true not just in the existence of our machines, but in the very spiritual challenges we now face daily. The ancients saw our world, and they left a message about the price of our own ingenuity. A conqueror's destiny was forged not on a battlefield, but in the heart of a vast desert. After securing Egypt, Alexander the Great felt a pull toward a legend, a journey to one of the most remote and revered sites in the ancient world. He marched his army for weeks across the unforgiving Sahara, guided by rare rains and, as the stories claim, by divine signs, to the isolated Siwa oasis. His goal was the Temple of Ammon, an oracle said to rival even Delphi in its wisdom. There, the young king, already master of a growing empire, asked the priest a question that has echoed through history. While the exact words exchanged remain shrouded in mystery, the oracle's proclamation was unequivocal. It confirmed Alexander as the son of the god Zeus Ammon himself, and it foretold that he was destined for unconquerable victory. This was not a vague hint. It was a divine endorsement of his right to rule the world. The prophecy became the bedrock of Alexander's identity and his campaign. From that moment on, he carried the title Son of Zeus with unwavering conviction, a belief that fueled his seemingly impossible ambitions. He marched east, and the oracle's words seemed to manifest with every triumph. He shattered the Persian Empire at Issus and Gaugamela. He conquered Egypt, Phoenicia, and Babylon, pushing his empire to the very borders of India. The prediction of unconquerable victory appeared to be playing out in real time, a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by Alexander's own indomitable belief. His soldiers, inspired by their leader's divine favor, followed him to the ends of the known earth. Yet, the prophecy's ultimate truth held a dark irony. Alexander the Great was never defeated in battle. He remained unconquered by any external enemy, just as the oracle had foretold. His empire, however, was not so invincible. It fractured and collapsed almost immediately after his premature death, a victim not of a foreign army, but of its own internal rivalries. The prophecy was technically correct, yet it failed to account for the fragility of human legacy. How much of our future is written in stone, and how much is shaped by the unstoppable force of a single person's belief? Long before the plague ships docked at Messina, a deep sense of dread had already settled over Europe. In the quiet of her cloister, the mystic Hildegard of Bingen received visions she described as a shadow falling over the world, a great pestilence that would rise from the east and cover the land, leaving fields untilled and cities silenced. She was not alone. Across the continent, local seers and folk traditions spoke of a coming purification by fire and fever, a punishment or a cosmic reset that would sweep through humanity. These were not the formal pronouncements of oracles, but whispers on the wind, recorded in monastic chronicles and village tales, a collective premonition of a horror yet to come. The signs themselves were interpreted as the very warnings foretold. Unusual weather patterns, famines, and even strange celestial events were seen as the precursors the prophecies had mentioned. Then, in the 1340s, the whispers became a scream. The Black Death arrived, a bacterial nightmare carried by fleas on rats, traveling along trade routes from Asia with terrifying speed. It fulfilled the medieval prophecies with a gruesome, undeniable accuracy. The pestilence did indeed rise from the east. It did cover the land, killing an estimated 1 in every 3 people from Italy to Iceland. The societal impact was catastrophic, exactly as foreseen. Fields were left empty, cities were depopulated, and the very fabric of medieval society was torn apart. In the aftermath, as survivors struggled to comprehend the scale of the loss, they looked back at the prophecies of Hildegard and others with a new, horrified reverence. The predictions had been perfectly accurate, yet utterly useless for prevention. They had named the storm, but provided no shelter from it. This reveals a profound truth about such forecasts. They often articulate a deep-seated, almost subconscious fear, giving it a shape and a name long before it manifests. The prophecy of the Black Death was less a prediction of a specific disease and more a diagnosis of a fragile world, a world that was already holding its breath, waiting for the shadow to fall. A god's promised return can be the most dangerous prophecy of all. For the Aztec people, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl was not just a deity of wind and wisdom. He was a central figure in their mythology who had once ruled over a golden age and then departed across the eastern sea. Their complex calendar system, a cycling of 52-year bundles of time, held a deep and specific dread. Ancient legends foretold that Quetzalcoatl would return from the east in a one red year, a date that cycled back into existence every 52 years to reclaim his rightful throne. This was not a vague hope. It was a precise astrological and theological expectation woven into the fabric of their empire. When the year 1 red arrived in the Aztec count, corresponding to the year 1519 in the European calendar, the entire civilization was watching the horizon. Their emperor, Moctezuma II, was a deeply religious man, and he was watching most intently of all. Then the prophecy took physical form. Spanish ships, vessels with vast white sails that looked nothing like Aztec canoes, appeared from the exact direction the god was predicted to arrive. From them came men with pale skin and full beards, clad in what seemed to be silver shells, led by Hernan Cortés. To Moctezuma and his priests, the parallels were unnerving, even terrifying. Cortés, they noted, arrived in a one red year. He came from the east. The conquistador's helmet, with its metal glint, bore a passing resemblance to the headdress of the feathered serpent. Was this the returning god? This profound uncertainty, born directly from the prophecy, caused a fatal paralysis in the Aztec leadership. Moctezuma hesitated. He sent emissaries with lavish gifts, treating Cortés with the reverence due to a deity, a strategy that only fueled the Spaniards' ambitions and convinced him of the empire's incredible wealth. This initial reluctance to confront the newcomers as mortal invaders gave Cortés the crucial time he needed to forge alliances with the Aztecs, many subject peoples, who were eager to overthrow their oppressive rulers. By the time Moctezuma realized his catastrophic error, it was too late. The prophecy had been a perfect trap. It provided a cognitive framework that made the unimaginable seem fated, disarming the empire at its most vulnerable moment. The accurate forecast of a bearded stranger arriving from the east in a specific year ultimately paved the way for the empire's swift and brutal collapse. A divine promise became a self-fulfilling doom. While the Aztecs watched the eastern sea, ancient Britons looked to their own sacred groves for a different kind of warning. The Druids, the intellectual and spiritual elite of Celtic Britain, were more than just priests. They were the judges, the historians, the philosophers, and the keepers of an oral tradition said to contain prophecies reaching back through centuries. Their power did not reside in stone temples, but in the deep, shadowed forests they held sacred, where they conducted their rituals and passed down their knowledge. According to Roman historians like Tacitus, this knowledge included a specific and unsettling prediction. The Druids foretold that their island would one day be invaded and conquered by a foreign power from across the water. This was not a vague fear of raiders, but a precise anticipation of a systematic, lasting occupation. The prophecy held that these invaders would bring a new way of life, one of paved roads and walled cities, fundamentally altering the landscape of Britain forever. For generations, this was a distant threat, a story told by firelight. Then, in the first century of the Common Era, the prophecy began to take tangible form. First came Julius Caesar's reconnaissance in force, two separate landings that demonstrated Roman interest and military might. The final, decisive fulfillment arrived decades later under Emperor Claudius. In the year 43, a massive Roman invasion force landed on the British coast. The legions marched inland, employing disciplined tactics and siege engines that the island's tribes had never encountered. They defeated powerful chieftains, established fortified camps, and began the relentless process of subjugation the Druids had long spoken of. The Romans, understanding the Druids' power as a unifying force of resistance, specifically targeted their sacred sites on the island of Anglesey, cutting down their groves and destroying their centers of learning in a brutal effort to extinguish the old prophecies along with the prophets. The prediction of foreign conquest had come to pass with terrifying accuracy, yet its true power lay in how it shaped the British response. For some tribes, the prophecy fueled a fierce, desperate resistance, a fight against a fate they believed could be challenged. For others, it may have created a sense of fatalism, a belief that the arrival of the legions was an unavoidable destiny. The Druidic foresight did not prevent the conquest, but it framed it, giving the Celtic people a narrative for the cataclysm that was reshaping their world. It raises a haunting question about the power of expectation. Does knowing a disaster is coming make you stronger, or does it prepare the ground for your own defeat? Even the man who united China could not escape the future written in the stars. Qin Shi Huang, the formidable first emperor, had forged a nation from warring states, standardizing its writing, its currency, and its very thought. Yet his greatest obsession was not with the empire he had built, but with the life he was destined to lose. He lived in terror of death, and the imperial court was constantly buzzing with seers, alchemists, and magicians, all promising the secret to immortality. They practiced complex forms of divination, reading the cracks on heated turtle shells, or interpreting the patterns cast by bundles of yarrow stalks, seeking the will of heaven. It was from these very practices that a chilling prophecy emerged. The ominous words, "The first emperor will die, and his land will be divided," were said to have been discovered. The message was a direct threat to everything Qin Shi Huang had created, a forecast of his personal end and the immediate collapse of his dynasty. The emperor's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the execution of scholars he suspected of spreading such treasonous predictions, and attempted to suppress any mention of the omen. But the prophecy only seemed to gain power from his denial. In the year 210, before the Common Era, while on one of his many tours to seek the elixir of life, the first emperor suddenly fell ill and died. The prediction of his death had come true. His inner circle, fearing instant rebellion, concealed his body and hastened back to the capital with a cart of rotting fish to mask the smell. The second part of the prophecy unfolded with even greater speed. The emperor's weak son, Huai, took the throne, but his rule was short and incompetent. The harsh legalist policies of his father had bred deep resentment across the land. Within mere years, massive peasant rebellions erupted. The Qin dynasty, which its founder believed would last for 10,000 generations, was overthrown, and the empire was, just as the prophecy had warned, divided among new warlords, giving rise to the Han dynasty. The emperor's frantic search for eternal life had been the very thing that blinded him to the future he was creating. His oppressive measures to silence the prophecy only hastened its fulfillment, proving that the most accurate predictions are often those we fight the hardest to avoid. What does it say about destiny when the fear of a prophecy becomes the very engine that drives it into reality? The fear of a foretold end can shape an entire civilization, and for the Vikings, that end had a name. From the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the shores of Newfound lands, the Norse people lived by a code of courage and honor, guided by a mythology that was brutally honest about the fate awaiting both gods and men. Central to this world view was the prophecy of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, a cataclysm meticulously detailed in the ancient poem known as the Voluspa. This was not a quiet ending, but a dramatic saga of destruction and rebirth, spoken by Cyrus to the god Odin himself. The prophecy describes a brutal series of events, a chain reaction of chaos that would lead to the final battle. It begins with Fimbulwinter, 3 consecutive winters with no summer in between, a time of such bitter cold that all bonds of kinship would shatter. Then would come the unleashing of monstrous forces, the wolf Fenrir breaking free from his bonds, the serpent Jormungandr rising from the ocean depths to poison the skies, and the burning of the world itself. The imagery is stark and visceral, a world consumed by ice, fire, and fang. Modern scholars have long wondered what could have inspired such a vivid and specific vision of apocalypse. The parallels to real historical events are striking. The Vikings were explorers who traveled widely, and they would have witnessed the raw power of nature in its most extreme forms. They likely experienced the atmospheric effects and crop failures caused by major volcanic eruptions, like the one at Eldgjá in Iceland in the 10th century, which could have cast a pall over the sun for years, creating a perpetual winter. They lived through periods of abrupt climate shift that would have turned fertile lands barren. The prophecy of Ragnarök reads like a poetic, mythologized account of these very real environmental disasters, a people trying to make sense of a world that could turn against them without warning. This prophecy was far more than just a story. It was the bedrock of the Viking spirit. The knowledge that even the gods were doomed to fight a battle they could not ultimately win forged a culture that valued bravery above all else. Why live a cautious life if the end is predetermined? This belief system encouraged them to face the unknown seas and fierce enemies with a defiant heart, to seek a glorious death in battle that would earn them a place in Valhalla. The prophecy of Ragnarök did not create a people of despair, but a people of immense resilience and action, who chose to meet their fated end with an axe in hand. It is a powerful reminder that the most accurate prophecies are not always those that prevent a fate, but those that give us the strength to face it. While the Vikings found meaning in a destined apocalypse, another civilization built its entire existence on a prophecy of perfect, predictable renewal. In the stark heat of the desert, the ancient Egyptians did not look for omens of doom, but for a single, life-giving sign on the horizon. Their survival depended on the Nile's annual flood, an event so central to their world that its prediction became a sacred science, a prophecy fulfilled with breathtaking regularity for thousands of years. The river's behavior was not left to chance. It was a divine promise. Priests, acting as both astronomers and holy men, meticulously tracked the heavens. They observed the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which they called Sopdet. Just before dawn, at the peak of summer, this brilliant star would reappear in the eastern sky after a long absence. Its return consistently heralded the Nile's imminent inundation. This celestial event was their prophecy, and it came true year after year. The connection was so reliable that the Egyptian calendar itself was built around it, with the new year beginning precisely with the flood's arrival. This was not seen as mere coincidence, but as the direct action of the god Hapi, the deity of the annual flood. Hapi was depicted as a robust figure with heavy breasts, symbolizing the abundance and nourishment he brought. The rising of Sirius was his signal, his divine covenant with the land of Egypt. When the priests announced the star's return, they were delivering a message from Hapi himself, a prophecy of fertile black soil and bountiful harvests. The impact of this accurate, cyclical prophecy on Egyptian civilization cannot be overstated. Because they could predict the flood, they could plan for it. Scribes calculated tax rates based on the expected yield. Farmers knew exactly when to move their livestock and when to prepare their fields. Granaries were built to store surplus. creating a buffer against rare years of low inundation. This predictability fostered a stability that lasted for millennia, allowing for the planning and construction of monumental projects like the pyramids. The entire pharaonic state rested on the foundation of this one reliable prophecy. It was a forecast that shaped not just their agriculture, but their art, their religion, and their very understanding of a harmonious universe. They lived in a world where heaven and earth were in perfect sync, where a God's promise was written in the stars and confirmed by the rising waters. How different is a civilization that trusts the future from one that fears it. A prophecy of total annihilation hangs over one of the ancient world's greatest cities. The biblical book of Ezekiel contains a series of stark pronouncements against the Phoenician city of Tyre, a wealthy and powerful island fortress renowned for its maritime trade and purple dye. Through the prophet, a devastating future was declared. The city would be utterly destroyed, its stones and timber cast into the sea, its site scraped bare like the top of a rock, and it would never be rebuilt. For a bustling metropolis, this seemed an impossible fate. Yet the details of this prediction are what make it so compelling, a checklist of destruction that history would meticulously fulfill. The prophecy stated that many nations would come against Tyre, that they would break down its walls and towers, and that its very debris would be thrown into the water. At the time of Ezekiel's writing, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had already begun a siege against the mainland suburbs of the city, a siege that lasted 13 years and ended with a compromise, not the city's fall. The island's stronghold remained defiant, seemingly proving the prophecy wrong, but the prediction was for a complete and final end, and it would require a conqueror of legendary ambition to see it through. That man was Alexander the Great. When Alexander marched down the Phoenician coast, most cities surrendered peacefully. Tyre, confident in its island walls a half-mile from shore, refused. Enraged by their defiance and needing their port to secure his supply lines, Alexander decided on an audacious plan. He would build a causeway from the mainland to the island. To construct this massive mole, his army literally scraped the site of the old mainland city bare, using its dust and rubble as fill. They then tore down the ruins of the mainland, throwing the stones, timber, and debris directly into the sea to form the foundation of their assault ramp. Every action was a direct, physical fulfillment of Ezekiel's words. The stones and timber were cast into the water. The site was scraped bare. After a brutal 7-month siege involving a massive naval blockade and sophisticated siege towers, Alexander's forces breached the walls. The city was sacked. Thousands of its citizens were slain or sold into slavery, and its glory was erased. While a small settlement persisted nearby, the great island city of Tyre was never rebuilt to its former power. It became, as prophesied, a place where fishermen would spread their nets. The significance of this event in biblical archaeology is profound. It stands as one of the most precise and verifiable fulfillments of a prophetic text, a sequence of events so specific that it seems to defy coincidence. The prophecy of Tyre's destruction is not just a story of divine judgment, but a chilling historical account of how a prediction can guide the very hands that bring it to pass. A parent's greatest fear became a king's inescapable destiny. In the heart of Greek mythology lies a prophecy so horrifying that it defines the very concept of a self-fulfilling doom. King Laius of Thebes and his wife, Queen Jocasta, received a devastating pronouncement from the Oracle at Delphi. Their future son, the prophecy declared, was destined to grow up to murder his father and then marry his own mother. The message was unambiguous, a direct forecast of patricide and the most profound taboo imaginable. Horrified, the royal couple believed they could outsmart the gods. When their son was born, they pierced his ankles, bound them with a leather strap, and ordered a shepherd to abandon the infant on a mountainside to die from exposure. It was a desperate, brutal act meant to sever the chain of fate before it could even begin. They were convinced they had won. They had prevented the prophecy by eliminating the child. But fate, in Greek tragedy, is not so easily denied. The shepherd, moved by pity, did not leave the baby to die. Instead, he gave the infant to a fellow shepherd from the neighboring city-state of Corinth. This man then brought the child to his own king and queen, Polybus and Merope, who were childless. They named the boy Oedipus, which means swollen foot, a permanent reminder of his original injury, and raised him as their own prince. Years later, the now-grown Oedipus, hearing a drunken man claim he was not his father's true son, also journeyed to the Oracle at Delphi to seek the truth. The oracle gave him the same terrible prophecy given to Laius so long ago. It told Oedipus he would kill his father and marry his mother. Believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, and horrified by this forecast, Oedipus immediately fled Corinth, vowing never to return to ensure the prophecy could not come true. He was running directly into the arms of the destiny he was trying to escape. On the road away from Corinth, he encountered a haughty older man in a chariot at a narrow crossroads. A quarrel over right-of-way escalated into violence, and Oedipus, in a fit of pride and rage, killed the man and his guards. The man was King Laius, his biological father. The first part of the prophecy was fulfilled, not through malicious intent, but through a tragic confluence of chance and character. Continuing his journey, Oedipus arrived at a Thebes plagued by the monstrous Sphinx. He solved her riddle, freeing the city, and as a reward, the grateful Thebans offered him the vacant throne and the hand of their recently widowed queen, Jocasta. Unknowingly, he married his own mother. For years, they ruled together and had 4 children, living in what they believed was prosperity, but was in truth the exact horror the prophecy had outlined. The eventual revelation of the truth, pieced together through a relentless search for the source of a new plague, was catastrophic. Jocasta took her own life. Oedipus blinded himself with her brooch, a physical manifestation of his inner blindness to the truth he had lived. The prophecy was accurate in every gruesome detail. The story of Oedipus endures because it explores a terrifying paradox. Was the prophecy a fixed decree that controlled every action, or did the very attempts to avoid it set the precise conditions for its fulfillment? Laius and Jocasta's attempt to kill their son created the separation that allowed Oedipus to not know his true parents. Oedipus's flight from the people he thought were his parents put him on the road to his real father. Their own choices, driven by fear, became the instruments of fate. This narrative cemented the role of the oracle in Greek thought, not as a simple fortune teller, but as a revealer of an unchangeable cosmic order. It asks a question that still haunts us. Does knowing the future give us the power to change it, or does that knowledge itself become the reason we bring it about? Even the most stable empires can be shattered by a prophecy from within. High in the Andes, the Inca civilization, a marvel of engineering and administration that stretched thousands of miles, was not brought low by an initial external attack, but by a self-inflicted wound their own seers had long warned against. Ancient legends, preserved in the oral histories recorded by Spanish chroniclers like Garcilaso de la Vega, spoke of a time of division, a prophecy that brothers would turn against each other and tear the empire apart. This was not a vague fear, but a specific caution that internal strife would be the true vulnerability, the crack through which doom would eventually enter. The source of these omens was often traced to the oracle at Huamak, a religious site of immense power where priests communicated with the gods, and to the interpretations of the empire's own wise men, the Amadas. They understood that a unified Tawantinsuyu, the land of the 4 quarters, was invincible, but a divided one was a ripe fruit waiting to fall. The prophecy came to its brutal fruition in the 1520s. The Inca Emperor Huayna Capac died, likely from a European disease that had raced ahead of the conquistadors themselves. His death created a vacuum of power, and the prophecy of civil war ignited. Two of his sons, the half-brothers Atahualpa and Huascar, each claimed the throne. What began as a political dispute exploded into a full-scale war that raged across the empire. Atahualpa, based in the northern city of Quito, commanded the battle-hardened armies of his father. Huascar held the imperial capital of Cuzco and its traditions. For years, the two brothers waged a devastating conflict, draining the treasury, decimating the finest Inca warriors, and shattering the loyalty of subject peoples who were forced to choose sides. This was the exact internal weakening the prophecies had foretold. Just as the war reached its climax, with Atahualpa's forces capturing and imprisoning Huascar, a new element arrived that the prophecies may not have fully detailed. Francisco Pizarro and his small band of Spanish conquistadors landed on the coast. They found an empire already broken, its armies exhausted, its leadership fractured, and its populace traumatized by the recent fraternal bloodshed. The prophecy had perfectly set the stage. Pizarro did not need to conquer a mighty, unified state. He merely had to topple a winner already weakened by a brutal civil war. The famous encounter at Cajamarca, where Pizarro captured Atahualpa by ambush, was only possible because the empire was already on its knees from the inside out. The Inca prophecy was accurate in its core warning that internal conflict would be their undoing, yet it could not foresee the alien nature of the external force that would ultimately capitalize on that weakness. The prediction ensured its own fulfillment, creating the very conditions that made a seemingly impossible conquest a tragic historical reality. Centuries before the rise of Christianity or Islam, a faith born in ancient Persia was already mapping the soul's final journey. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions, introduced a revolutionary concept to the ancient world: a cosmic battle between good and evil with a definitive prophesied end. At the heart of this belief system rests the figure of the Saoshyant, a coming savior foretold in sacred texts like the Gathas and the later Bundahishan. This was not a vague hope, but a detailed eschatological prophecy. The Saoshyant, whose name means one who brings benefit, is described as a future progeny of the prophet Zoroaster himself, a messianic figure born from a virgin who would appear at the end of time. His arrival would signal the final renovation of the universe, the Frashocredy. In this great event, the world would be cleansed by a river of molten metal, a purifying flood that the righteous would experience as warm milk and the wicked as searing punishment. The dead would be resurrected, and humanity would be made perfect, living in a world free from deceit, old age, or death. This was a prophecy of total world renewal, a promise that the struggle between light and darkness would not be eternal, but would culminate in a final, glorious victory for good. The details of this ancient prophecy ripple through later history with uncanny resonance. The Zoroastrian concept of a final judgment, a savior figure, and a cosmic battle profoundly influenced the development of Jewish apocalyptic literature during the Babylonian exile, ideas which later flowed into Christian and Islamic teachings about a Messiah and the end of days. The parallels are too striking to ignore, a theological blueprint that would shape billions of believers across different faiths. But the prophecy's power is not just in its broad influence, it is in its personal stakes. It tells every individual that their choices in the ongoing moral struggle matter, that they are part of a cosmic story that is moving inexorably toward a promised dawn. How does a prophecy survive for 3,000 years? It does so not by predicting a single event, but by offering a timeless vision of hope, a promise that no matter how deep the darkness, a world made new is always on the horizon. The hope for a returning king can shape a nation's soul long after his reign has ended. On the misty shores of Britain, as the last Roman legions withdrew, a legend was born from the chaos of invasion and the desperate need for a savior. Celtic folklore, rich with tales of heroic warriors and mystical lands, began to whisper of a leader who had not truly died. They spoke of Arthur Pendragon, the great battle chief who had united the Britons against the Saxon invaders. The stories claimed he was not dead, but merely sleeping, wounded, in a hidden cave or a magical island like Avalon, waiting for the trumpet call of his people's greatest peril. This was the prophecy of the once and future king, a promise that Arthur would return when Britain needed him most. The origins of this belief are deeply rooted in the historical trauma of post-Roman Britain. With the collapse of Roman authority in the 5th century, the island fragmented into warring kingdoms, vulnerable to attacks from all sides. The historical figure of Arthur, likely a Romano-British war leader who won a significant, if temporary, victory against the Saxons at Mount Badon, became the anchor for this powerful myth. In a time of darkness, the people forged a legend of light, a prophecy that their greatest defender would come back to them. This was not a prediction of a single event, but a recurring national fantasy, a story told to endure present suffering. And so, for over a millennium, whenever England faced a profound crisis, the prophecy was invoked. During the Norman Conquest, Welsh bards sang of Arthur's imminent return to drive out the foreign rulers. In the 12th century, the monks of Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the tombs of Arthur and Guinevere, a clever act that sought to lay the legend to rest for political reasons, yet the story only grew stronger. The Tudor dynasty, eager to legitimize their Welsh roots, enthusiastically adopted Arthurian symbolism, weaving themselves into the very myth to solidify their right to rule. The prophecy proved endlessly adaptable, its core promise of salvation being reimagined for every new generation. How powerful is a story that can offer hope for 1500 years? The prophecy of Arthur's return is unique, not for its historical accuracy, but for its enduring emotional truth. It speaks to a universal longing for a lost golden age and the unshakable belief that a hero can emerge from the past to rescue the future. A different kind of prophecy was being woven into the very landscape of the American Southwest. For the Hopi people, time is not a straight line, but a series of cycles, each marked by signs and portents, passed down through generations by oral tradition. Their world view holds that we are living in the fourth world, a place we were meant to care for, and their elders have long spoken of a set of stone tablets and a series of warnings that outline the path of this world from its beginning to its potential end. These are not vague spiritual musings, but a precise and chillingly accurate checklist of events that would signal the world falling out of balance. The prophecies spoke of a gourd of ashes that would fall from the sky, boiling the rivers and making the land barren. They described a great spider web that would be built around the earth, through which people could speak to each other instantly from every corner of the globe. They even foretold the coming of a strange race of people with pale skin, much like the foam of the ocean, who would claim the land and bring with them a new way of life, marked by greed and disconnection from the earth. When European colonizers arrived with their light skin and sailing ships, the Hopi recognized this as the fulfillment of a specific stage in their prophecy. But the later signs held even greater weight. The gourd of ashes is seen by many as a stark prediction of the atomic bomb, a man-made sun that fell from the sky and whose fallout poisoned the land. The great spider web is an almost perfect description of the internet, a global network of instantaneous communication. The relevance of these ancient warnings today is profound and unsettling. They predicted our current environmental crisis, not as a random event, but as the direct consequence of living out of harmony with nature. The prophecies stated that when the trees began to die from the tops down, it would be a clear sign that the end of the cycle was near, a phenomenon we now witness in widespread forest die-offs from pollution and climate change. They warned of a time when the blue star Cachina would make its appearance in the heavens, signaling the start of a great purification, an event some have linked to the appearance of a blue-tinted comet or other celestial body. For the Hopi, these were not predictions of an unavoidable apocalypse, but a final exam for humanity. The prophecies carry a crucial caveat, a thread of hope woven into the dire warnings. The outcome, they say, is not fixed. It depends entirely on the choices we make, on whether we can remember our original instructions to live simply, to respect the earth, and to walk in balance. The accuracy of their foresight is not meant to terrify us into inaction, but to awaken us to our own power and responsibility. They saw our world of skyscrapers and satellites centuries before it existed, and they left a message in the wind and stone, a question that now echoes back to us. Can we read the signs in time to change the ending they so clearly saw approaching? The legend of Rome's destiny was written in the flight of birds. Before he traced the sacred boundary of his new city, its founder Romulus stood atop the Palatine Hill and pleaded with the gods for a sign. He and his twin brother Remus each sought divine approval to rule, watching the sky for an omen. To Romulus, the gods sent a vision of overwhelming power, 12 majestic eagles soaring across the heavens. This was not merely a sign of favor, it was a numerical prophecy. The 12 eagles, ancient seers interpreted, foretold the 12 centuries during which the city of Rome would stand supreme. From that moment, the number 12 was etched into the Roman soul as the measure of their epoch. The primary sources for this story, like the historian Livy, recorded it not as simple folklore, but as a foundational prophecy, a celestial clock that started ticking at the city's very birth. For generations, Romans looked back at that omen with a mixture of pride and anxiety, watching the passage of time as one might watch sand fall in an hourglass, knowing that one day the final grain would drop. The interpretation of this prophecy evolved as Rome itself transformed. Some later historians and intellectuals, looking back after the empire's fall, saw the 12 eagles not as literal centuries of 365 days each, but as 12 great epochs, or as a count of the most significant emperors who defined Rome's imperial age. They attempted to map the prophecy onto their own history, searching for a pattern that would make the divine message clear. From the divine Augustus, who established the imperial system, to the philosophical Marcus Aurelius, and finally to the brutal Commodus, whose reign often marks the end of a perceived golden age. They counted off the rulers, trying to see where the prophetic count reached its terminus. The chilling accuracy of the legend, however, lies in its broader arc. If one calculates the traditional founding of Rome in the year 753 before the Common Era and adds 12 centuries, the endpoint falls in the 4th century of the Common Era, around the year 447. This period aligns not with a specific battle, but with a profound and irreversible shift. It was the era when barbarian tribes carved the Western Roman Empire into kingdoms of their own, when the Eternal City was sacked, and when the center of power had decisively moved east to Constantinople. The prophecy of the 12 eagles did not predict a single day of collapse, but the expiration of a world-changing supremacy. The omen given to Romulus was ultimately a promise of limitation, a reminder that even the greatest glory is bound by time. It asks us a silent question, one every Roman eventually had to confront. What do you do when you know from the very beginning that your story has an end date? An empire cloaked in isolation for centuries was about to be reborn from within. Long before the black ships of Commodore Perry forced Japan to open its ports, a current of change was already flowing through the islands, whispered in the prophecies of ancient texts and the visions of rural seers. For over 250 years, the Tokugawa shogunate had held absolute power, while the emperor in Kyoto was a revered but politically powerless figurehead, a living symbol of a distant past. Yet within this rigid structure, a prophecy began to circulate, one that spoke of a time when the heavenly sovereign would be restored to his rightful place. This idea was deeply rooted in Shinto beliefs and in certain interpretations of the Nihon Shoki, one of Japan's oldest chronicles, which spoke of a cyclical return to imperial virtue. The prophecy was not a single verse, but a growing cultural sentiment, a belief that the shogunate's rule was a temporary aberration and that the sun would once again rise on the emperor's direct authority. This was the intellectual and spiritual fuel that would ignite the Meiji Restoration. The figures who drove this revolution were not cynical politicians, but men who genuinely believed they were enacting a divine and foretold destiny. Samurai from powerful domains like Satsuma and Choshu, disillusioned with the shogunate's inability to handle the foreign threat, saw themselves as instruments of this prophecy. Their rallying cry, Sano Joy, meaning revere the emperor and expel the barbarians, was not just a political slogan, it was a call to fulfill a cosmic reordering. They believed that by toppling the shogunate and restoring Emperor Meiji to power, they were not making a new Japan, but returning it to its ancient, proper form. This prophetic framework gave the reformers an unshakable sense of purpose and legitimacy. How do you dismantle a 250-year-old system? You must first believe that you are not destroying it, but correcting a historical wrong, that you are the chosen agents of a long-awaited dawn. When the final, relatively bloodless coup took place in 1868, it was seen by its architects not as a mere political victory, but as the fulfillment of a national prophecy. The prophecy of imperial restoration had provided the moral and spiritual authority to accomplish one of the most rapid and dramatic transformations in world history, proving once again that the most powerful predictions are those that tell a people who they are destined to become. Even the mighty Persian Empire, a colossus that stretched from the Nile to the Indus, was not immune to the whispers of fate. Long before the Macedonian phalanx cast its long shadow, the Magi, the priestly class of Zoroastrianism, had read a troubling future in the stars and in their sacred fires. Their traditions, preserved in later histories, spoke of a prophecy, a warning that a great destroyer would come from the west, a conqueror whose armies would bring fire and the end of their dynasty. This was not a vague fear, but a specific forecast woven into their understanding of a cosmic struggle, a belief that a period of chaos would precede the final triumph of good. The Greek historian Herodotus, ever a collector of tales, recorded that the Magi had interpreted dreams for Persian kings, visions of a winged threat that would one day descend from the west to devour the land. For generations, this was a distant thunder, a story for the court. Then, the thunder became the rumble of 40,000 marching feet. Alexander the Great crossed the Hellespont in the year 334 before the Common Era, and the prophecy began its relentless march into reality. His campaigns were a whirlwind of destruction for the Persians, fulfilling the Magi's warnings with terrifying precision. He shattered the royal army at the Granicus River, then again at Issus, where King Darius III fled the battlefield, leaving his own family to be captured. The final, decisive blow came at Gaugamela, where Alexander's tactical genius dismantled the vast Persian host, effectively ending the Achaemenid dynasty that had ruled for centuries. The great destroyer from the west had arrived, just as foretold. But the prophecy did more than just predict the invasion. It actively shaped the Persian resistance. For the last loyal satraps and generals, this was not merely a war for territory. It was a spiritual battle against a fated doom. Their struggle took on the character of a holy war, a desperate attempt to defy the stars themselves. The tragic figure of Darius, constantly outmaneuvered and betrayed, might have seen his own downfall through the lens of this unavoidable prophecy, a belief that could have eroded his will at critical moments. The Magi's foresight proved accurate in its grim outline, yet it also served to frame the collapse, giving the Persians a narrative for a catastrophe that otherwise seemed incomprehensible. How does a civilization process its own annihilation? Often, it reaches for a story written long before the first sword was drawn, finding a strange comfort in the idea that even this was part of a larger, foretold plan. Centuries before a star would guide 3 travelers to a humble stable, a prophet in the hills of Judah delivered a message that would define a holy city. The Book of Micah, written in the 8th century before the Common Era, contains a verse of stunning specificity amid warnings of judgment and promises of restoration. It declares that a ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times, will come from you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah. The prophecy names the exact, seemingly insignificant village where this future leader would be born. This was not a grand capital like Jerusalem, but a small agricultural town, famous only as the birthplace of King David 1,000 years earlier. The prediction tied the coming Messiah directly to David's royal line, establishing a divine link between the past and a promised future. For hundreds of years, this prophecy was a cornerstone of Jewish hope during times of exile and oppression, a specific promise to cling to in a sea of uncertainty. Then, in the reign of Caesar Augustus, a census decree forced a man named Joseph, a descendant of David, to travel from his home in Nazareth to his ancestral town of Bethlehem. There, in a crowded village with no room in the inn, his betrothed, Mary, gave birth to a son. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke explicitly frame this event as the direct fulfillment of Micah's words, presenting Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah whose birthplace was pinpointed centuries in advance. The theological significance of this fulfilled prophecy is immense within Christian belief. It is seen as a divine signature, a piece of evidence woven into history that authenticates Jesus' identity as the promised one. The fact that a Roman emperor's bureaucratic order unknowingly played a part in moving a pregnant woman across the country to fulfill an ancient prediction is viewed not as coincidence, but as providence, demonstrating a power that guides even world empires to achieve a spiritual purpose. This one detail, the name of a small town, became a foundational pillar for a faith that would spread across the globe. It transforms a historical event into a theological certainty, a moment where a prophet's voice from a distant age seems to have spoken directly into a manger in Judea. How does a single, precise location, named hundreds of years in advance, shape the faith of billions? It creates an unbreakable thread between a promise made and a promise kept, turning geography into a testament of belief. Across the vast Pacific, another island culture was watching for a sign. For the Maori people of Aotearoa, now known as New Zealand, history was not a surprise, but a story whose chapters had already been foretold. Their traditions speak of a great seer named Tuaroa, who lived generations before any European sail broke the horizon. In a deep trance, he received a powerful vision, which he shared in intricate detail. He described the coming of a strange race of people, their skin pale as the underbelly of a fish, who would arrive in floating islands with immense white wings. These beings, he warned, would bring with them a new god, a creature with 4 feet that walked on its stomach, a cryptic reference that would later be understood as the introduced sheep, an animal that would utterly transform the land. This was not a single prophecy, but a body of oral histories and warnings passed down through the lines of chiefs and priests, a precise anticipation of a world about to be turned upside down. The descriptions were startlingly accurate. The great waka, or canoes of the Maori, were dugout vessels, but the prophecy spoke of something entirely different, wooden structures so vast they were like land, powered by clouds of cloth, a perfect depiction of the European sailing ships with their complex rigging and canvas sails. The pale skin of the newcomers was a specific point of fascination and foreboding, setting them apart from the Polynesian people completely. For centuries, these predictions were part of the Maori spiritual landscape, a future event held in collective memory. Then, in the late 18th century, the prophecy stepped out of legend and into the waters of the Pacific. When Captain James Cook's Endeavour first appeared in 1769, the Maori response was not one of simple shock, but of profound recognition. Many of the warriors who paddled out to meet the ship were not seeing an impossibility. They were witnessing the fulfillment of a destiny their ancestors had described. This foreknowledge created a complex and often tragic dynamic. Some tribes, believing the newcomers were tupua, or goblins, and therefore not bound by the rules of tapu, or sacred law, attacked immediately. Others, recalling prophecies that spoke of these beings bringing new technologies and goods, were more welcoming, initiating trade. This initial period of contact was a direct manifestation of the prophecies, shaping the first encounters in ways that were both violent and transactional. The accuracy of the Maori foresight is haunting, yet it also reveals a familiar pattern. They predicted the arrival, the appearance of the people, and the vessels they would arrive in. What the prophecies could not fully convey was the scale of the change that would follow, the diseases that would decimate the population, the muskets that would intensify intertribal warfare, and the eventual loss of land and sovereignty. The prophecy was a perfect map of the first contact, but the territory it led to was a colonial reality far more brutal and enduring than any verse could contain. How do you prepare for a future you can name, but whose true cost remains a mystery until it is far too late? No one in Troy would listen to the princess. Cassandra, daughter of King Priam, possessed a terrible gift, the ability to see the future with perfect clarity, a power granted by the god Apollo. But her blessing was twisted into a curse, a divine cruelty that ensured no one would ever believe her frantic warnings. As the Trojans marveled at the colossal wooden horse left on their shore, a supposed offering to the goddess Athena, Cassandra alone saw the truth. She screamed that it was a trick, that Greek soldiers were hidden within its hollow belly, that the city was moments from destruction. Her cries were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, her prophetic visions ignored by the very people she was trying to save. This tragic figure stands at the heart of the ancient prophecies surrounding the Trojan War, a conflict foretold from its very beginning. Long before the first ship set sail for Troy, the seeds of the war were sown in prophecy. The mythological sources, primarily Homer's Iliad and the epic cycles that followed, are steeped in this foresight. The oracle had warned Paris, another of Priam's sons, that his desire for the most beautiful woman in the world would lead to the utter destruction of his city. He pursued Helen regardless, abducting her from her husband, the Spartan king Menelaus, and thus fulfilling the first part of the grim forecast. The gods themselves were not mere spectators. They were directors of this fated drama, with Zeus orchestrating the conflict to reduce the human population, a plan itself rooted in a deeper, older prophecy. Every key player, from the warrior Achilles who knew his glory in battle would lead to an early death, to the hero Odysseus, who foresaw a long and arduous journey home, was acting within a web of divine predictions. The role of oracles was not to prevent the war, but to frame its inevitability. Priam and Hecuba warned that their son Paris would be the ruin of Troy, exposed him on a mountainside as an infant, a desperate act that failed just as it had for Oedipus's parents. The boy survived, was raised by shepherds, and grew up to trigger the very catastrophe his parents had sought to avoid. The prophecies created a sense of tragic momentum, a feeling that every attempt to escape fate only tightened its grip. When the Greek fleet assembled to reclaim Helen, they were stalled by contrary winds, an omen that demanded a horrific price. The seer Calchas revealed that the goddess Artemis required the sacrifice of their commander's own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon, faced with an impossible choice between his child and his destiny as a leader of the great expedition, chose the latter, setting in motion a chain of vengeance that would haunt him long after Troy fell. This narrative, woven through with unheeded warnings and unavoidable doom, shaped one of history's most famous conflicts into a timeless lesson about the limits of human agency. The people of Troy had every piece of the puzzle. Cassandra screamed the truth from the walls. Their own priests were wary of the wooden horse. Yet in their moment of triumph, their relief at the apparent Greek retreat, they chose hope over foresight. They dragged the massive horse inside their impregnable walls, sealing their own fate. The accuracy of the prophecies was absolute, yet their power lay not in changing the future, but in revealing the tragic flaws of those who heard them. What use is the clearest vision of tomorrow if pride, desire, or simple relief deafens you to its message? The fall of Troy was not just a military defeat. It was a mythological symphony composed by the fates, where every note, from a queen's dream to a princess's scream, was played exactly as written. From the whispers of oracles to the complex calendars of vanished empires, we have walked through a gallery of futures foretold. These 25 prophecies reveal a truth that spans continents and centuries. Humanity has always stared into the unknown, trying to map the shadows of tomorrow. The sheer diversity is staggering, from the mathematical precision of the Nile's flood to the psychological trap that ensnared the Aztecs, from the technological foresight of Tibetan monks to the self-fulfilling tragedies of Greek kings. Each story is a unique window into the mind of an ancient people, yet they all share a common thread, an uncanny alignment with the pages of history. They force us to confront the eerie possibility that some threads of time are not woven at random, but are part of a pattern we can only glimpse in fragments. This enduring fascination is more than mere curiosity. It is a fundamental part of our desire to find meaning, to see a hand guiding the chaos, or to be warned of the storms ahead. The mystery remains, a delicate balance between fate and free will, between a future that is written and one that we write ourselves with every choice we make. If these stories of predictions that came true have sparked your own curiosity, we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these ancient prophecies do you find the most compelling? Have you encountered any other historical forecasts that seem to defy explanation? Share your own mysteries in the comments below, and if you want to continue this journey into the past, be sure to subscribe for more explorations into the world's greatest historical enigmas.